The janitor's hands were rough, calloused from years of scrubbing floors, lifting heavy buckets, and polishing marble until it gleamed. No one who passed him in the grand lobby of the towering glass headquarters ever thought to look twice. To them, he was invisible, just another man in a faded blue uniform pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. But inside those hands was a secret, something he hadn't touched in years, something buried beneath pain, loss, and silence. His name was Daniel Moretti, a single father trying to make ends meet in a world that seemed determined to forget men like him. Every morning before the sun rose over the city, he packed his daughter's lunch, tied her hair into a neat ponytail, kissed her forehead, and walked her to school. Then, he would ride the bus across town to the shining skyscraper that wasn't his world but had become his survival. While others hustled into boardrooms with laptops and polished shoes, Daniel entered through the side door with his mop and cart, quietly disappearing into the background. The company he worked for wasn't just any company. It was Sterling Enterprises, a multinational giant that boasted power, prestige, and wealth beyond imagination. The CEO, Richard Sterling, was a man both feared and admired, known for his ruthless decisions and sharp mind. His employees whispered about him in the hallways, how he could build empires with a handshake, but also destroy careers with a single frown. To him, everything was about profit, image, and control. Men like Daniel weren't even on his radar. And yet, fate has a strange way of weaving the smallest lives into the grandest stages. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The building was buzzing with activity as Sterling Enterprises prepared for a gala, a massive celebration of their latest deal, bringing in partners from around the world. The lobby had been transformed with chandeliers, crimson carpets, and a gleaming black piano standing proudly in the corner. Its polished surface reflected the golden light, and guests would later gather around to sip champagne as live music filled the air. Daniel had seen the piano when he came in that morning. For a moment, as he wheeled his cart past it, he froze. His breath caught, his hands twitched, almost reaching out. Memories came flooding back. The sound of ivory keys beneath his fingers, the smell of his old apartment where music once filled every corner, the voice of his late wife whispering encouragement as he played lullabies for their baby girl. Music had once been his life. He had studied it, dreamed of it, lived inside it. But when tragedy struck, when illness took his wife and bills piled high, he locked away that part of himself. There was no room for music when rent, food, and survival became the priority. So he forced himself to turn away, gripping the mop handle tighter, scrubbing the marble until his reflection blurred into the floor. By nightfall, the gala was in full swing. Daniel worked quietly on the edges, emptying trash bins, polishing smudges from glass, making sure the chaos of celebration didn't leave behind too much of a mess. He kept his head down, as always, and avoided the eyes of the wealthy guests. But not everyone ignored him. In the corner of the room, a small group of junior executives gathered around the piano, glasses in hand, their laughter rising above the music that played from the speakers. They weren't particularly cruel people, just young, arrogant, and drunk on the privilege of being close to power. One of them, noticing Daniel pass by with his cart, smirked. "Hey, janitor," he called out, his voice mocking. "You know how to play this thing." He tapped the piano lid with his champagne glass. Daniel froze, startled, then shook his head quickly. "I'm just here to clean, sir." The group laughed. "Oh, come on. What's the harm? Give us a tune. Play Twinkle Twinkle." At least, another teased, the sarcasm dripping from his voice. Daniel's cheeks burned. He wanted to vanish, to melt into the marble. But the voices grew louder, pulling the attention of others nearby. Soon, a few guests turned their heads, curious at the commotion. "Let him play," one of them cheered, amused by the idea of a janitor at the grand piano. And then, As if destiny had chosen this moment, Richard Sterling himself appeared, stepping into the circle with his commanding presence. The room hushed slightly, eyes following him. He glanced at the group, then at Daniel, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" Sterling asked. The young executive grinned nervously. "We were just having a little fun, sir. We thought the janitor might give us a laugh on the piano." Sterling's lips curved into the faintest smirk. His gaze shifted back to Daniel. "Well then," he said, his voice smooth but edged with challenge. "Why don't you? Let's see if our janitor can entertain us tonight." The words weren't cruel, but they carried the weight of command. And suddenly, Daniel found himself standing before the piano, every eye in the room on him. His heart pounded in his chest. His palms sweated. He wanted to refuse, to walk away. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the glimmer of his daughter's face in his mind, maybe it was the years of silence aching to be broken. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered himself onto the bench. The laughter had died down now, replaced by an odd, tense anticipation. Some smirked, expecting nothing. Others leaned in, curious. Sterling crossed his arms, watching closely. Daniel placed his hands on the keys. At first, his fingers trembled, stiff from years without practice. He pressed a note, then another. The sound rang out, soft but true. The room chuckled lightly. But then, he closed his eyes. And when he began to play in earnest, the room fell into silence. It wasn't a simple tune or a clumsy attempt. It was music, real music. Deep, haunting, beautiful. His fingers, though rough from years of labor, moved with grace across the keys, weaving a melody that seemed to come not from the piano, but from his very soul. Each note carried the weight of his struggles, the loneliness of nights spent cleaning empty hallways, the love for a daughter who was his only reason to keep breathing. It was a lullaby, a requiem, and a confession all in one. The laughter died completely. Glasses paused mid-air. Conversations ceased. The gala melted away until all that existed was the sound of Daniel's music. Some guests closed their eyes, lost in the melody. Others stared in disbelief at the janitor who suddenly transformed into something far greater. And then, without warning, a single tear slipped down Richard Sterling's cheek. The mighty CEO, a man known for his coldness, sat motionless, his eyes locked on the janitor at the piano. Something in that music touched him in a place he thought long dead. Memories of his own childhood, of dreams abandoned for power, came rushing back. For the first time in years, he felt human again. When the final note lingered in the air and faded, silence held the room like a spell. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then thunderous, rising like a wave. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. Daniel sat frozen, overwhelmed, unsure if he had done something miraculous or made a terrible mistake. But one thing was certain. His life, and the life of his daughter, would never be the same again. The applause seemed endless, echoing through the marble halls, rolling over Daniel like a wave he wasn't ready for. His hands still hovered above the piano keys, trembling, as though the music had been pulled out of him against his will and now left him hollow, exposed. He didn't dare lift his eyes, but he felt it, the weight of hundreds of gazes, no longer mocking, but something else entirely. When the clapping finally faded, the silence that followed felt almost heavier than the sound. Then came a voice, deep and steady, carrying more than authority. It carried surprise, maybe even awe. "Who are you?" Richard Sterling asked, his words quiet but cutting through the stillness. Daniel swallowed, shifting uneasily on the bench. "I'm nobody, sir. Just the janitor." Sterling's eyes narrowed, studying him with an intensity that unsettled Daniel more than the mockery ever had. For years, no one had looked at him like that, not as a piece of the background, not as a man in uniform blending into walls, but as someone who had just done something that mattered. The CEO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving a stunned murmur among the crowd. The guests began talking all at once, voices bubbling with disbelief, admiration, even embarrassment for having laughed earlier. A few approached Daniel, offering words of praise, but he stood quickly, shaking his head, retreating back toward his cart. He couldn't stay in the spotlight. It felt wrong, dangerous. He was supposed to be invisible, and now, suddenly, everyone saw him. He slipped out of the room as quietly as he could, retreating into the familiar comfort of the empty hallways. His cart squeaked softly as he pushed it, his heart still pounding. The music still lingered inside him, like a ghost refusing to fade. He hated himself for letting it out, for revealing what he had kept locked away for so long. By the time he reached the janitor's closet, his hands were shaking. He sat down heavily on a stool, covering his face. He thought of Amelie, his daughter. What would she say if she knew? Would she be proud, or would she worry, like she always did, that her father was drawing too much attention, that something bad might happen? For Daniel knew something that the guests didn't. Music wasn't just his passion. It was his wound. Every time he touched the keys, he felt his wife's absence, her laughter echoing in the melodies they once shared, the dreams they once built together before sickness stole her away. Playing meant bleeding, and he couldn't afford to bleed when his daughter needed him strong. He decided then, tomorrow, he would go back to normal. He would mop the floors, empty the bins, polish the marble. Tonight would fade into gossip, then into nothing. That's what he told himself. But fate, once again, had other plans. The next morning, when Daniel arrived for his shift, the building buzzed differently. He noticed the stairs first. Employees who usually brushed past him without a word now paused, whispering, some even offering shy nods. It unnerved him. He ducked his head, trying to move quickly, but whispers followed him down the hallways. In the lobby, 2 security guards stopped him, not to reprimand, but to escort him upstairs. Daniel's chest tightened. Was he in trouble? Fired? He imagined his daughter's face when he told her, imagined the rent notice on his kitchen table, the unpaid bills. Panic clawed at him as the elevator doors closed. When they opened, he was led straight into the lion's den, the CEO's office. The room was vast, lined with glass that overlooked the city. Richard Sterling stood by the window, his back to Daniel, hands clasped behind him. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Daniel shifted nervously, his cap twisting in his hands. Finally, Sterling turned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp, cold eyes, were different than before, softer, perhaps, troubled. Sit, Sterling said. Daniel obeyed, perching awkwardly on the edge of a leather chair that felt far too expensive to hold him. Sterling studied him for a long time before speaking. I don't like surprises, he began. Last night, you surprised me. That doesn't happen often. Daniel opened his mouth to apologize, but Sterling raised a hand, silencing him. You've been working here how long? Almost 3 years, sir, Daniel said quietly. And in all that time, you've been mopping floors when you should have been filling concert halls. Sterling's voice carried a strange mix of accusation and curiosity. Why? Daniel's throat tightened. Because life doesn't care about should, sir. My daughter needed me, she still does. Music doesn't pay rent. Sterling leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Your daughter. You're a single father, then. Daniel nodded. Her mother passed away. It's just us now. For a moment, something flickered in Sterling's eyes. He cleared his throat. What you did last night, it wasn't just talent. It was something more. People felt it. I felt it. The admission seemed to pain him, as though confessing vulnerability was foreign, dangerous. "I don't know what your story is, Moretti," Sterling continued, "but the world should hear what I heard last night." Daniel stiffened. "With respect, sir, I don't want the world to hear. I just want to do my job and take care of my daughter." Sterling's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't used to people refusing him. But instead of anger, he looked thoughtful. "Very well," he said at last. "But understand this, sometimes, life doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes, it drags us onto the stage whether we're ready or not." Daniel left the office shaken. He wanted to disappear back into obscurity, but the universe seemed determined to drag him out. That week, clips from the gala leaked online. Someone had filmed him playing. Within days, the video spread like wildfire, gathering millions of views. Headlines appeared. "Janitor's piano performance stuns gala guests. From mop to maestro, the hidden talent of Sterling Enterprises janitor." Daniel's world shifted overnight. Strangers stopped him on the street, asking if he was the piano janitor. Parents at his daughter's school whispered as he walked by. Amelie herself came home one afternoon waving a printed photo from the internet, eyes wide with pride. "Papa, is this really you?" she asked breathlessly. Daniel's heart ached as he nodded. She threw her arms around him, giggling. "I knew you were special." He wanted to share her joy, but fear gnawed at him. Attention wasn't safety. Attention meant scrutiny, risk, change. He didn't know if he could survive another change. But change had already begun. One evening, weeks later, Sterling called him back into the office. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "We're hosting an international summit," the CEO said. "Leaders, investors, media from across the world will be here. I want you to play." Daniel froze. "Sir, I can't. I don't belong there." Sterling's gaze hardened. "Last time you played, you moved an entire room of cynics to silence. You moved me. Do you have any idea how impossible that is? Don't tell me you don't belong. You were born for this." Daniel's hands shook. His instincts screamed to refuse, to retreat, to cling to the shadows. But another voice echoed in his mind. His daughter's laughter, her words, "I knew you were special." He looked Sterling in the eye, and for the first time, he didn't see just a CEO. He saw a man who had been touched by the same wound of life, though perhaps in different ways. "All right," Daniel said softly. "I'll play." Sterling nodded. Once, his expression unreadable. But when Daniel left, a single thought crossed the CEO's mind, one he hadn't allowed himself in years. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than profit and power. Maybe music could reach places even he had forgotten existed. And deep down, though he didn't yet admit it, Richard Sterling knew that Daniel Moretti, the janitor with the piano in his soul, was about to change not just his company, but his life. The night of the summit arrived with a weight Daniel had never felt before. The skyscraper gleamed brighter than ever, its glass walls reflecting the city lights like a beacon. Inside, the grand ballroom had been transformed into something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers dripping with light, velvet drapes pooling like rivers of red, and rows of polished seats filled with some of the most powerful figures in the world. Heads of state, foreign investors, media giants, celebrities, every corner of influence had gathered here under Sterling's invitation. And somewhere among them, hiding behind a curtain near the stage, stood Daniel Moretti. His uniform had been replaced with a simple suit, borrowed and a little too tight, but neat. His calloused hands clutched each other tightly, as though he could keep them from trembling if he just held on hard enough. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of papers. And above it all, he could hear his daughter's voice in his mind. "Papa, I knew you were special." Sterling entered the backstage area, his presence commanding even here in the shadows. For once, Though, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO. His expression was serious, almost human. "Are you ready?" Sterling asked. Daniel shook his head honestly. "No, but I'll play anyway." A flicker of something crossed Sterling's face. Respect, perhaps. He gave a curt nod and left, returning to his seat at the front of the hall. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Daniel Moretti." For a heartbeat, Daniel couldn't move. Then, slowly, he stepped into the light. The whispers began immediately. Cameras lifted. Some leaned forward, curious. Others frowned in confusion. What was a janitor doing on this stage, introduced at such an event? Daniel sat at the grand piano in the center of the stage. Its black lacquer shone like still water. He placed his hands gently on the keys, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. The first note was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper breaking the silence. The second followed, then the third. Slowly, the melody began to take shape, tender and uncertain at first, then growing bolder, richer, until it filled every corner of the hall. It wasn't just music, it was a story. He played the story of a young man who once dreamed of concert halls and endless applause. He played the story of love, of a woman who believed in him, who sat beside him at an old piano in a tiny apartment, laughing as they played duets together. He played the story of loss, the slow, cruel silence that came when her laughter was gone forever. He played the story of a father, standing in the ruins of his dreams, choosing to live not for himself, but for the small, bright-eyed daughter who depended on him. Every note carried the weight of his years of struggle, but also the light of his love. His fingers danced, sometimes fierce, sometimes tender, weaving joy and sorrow into something too deep for words. The audience sat frozen, caught in the spell. Cameras stopped clicking. Glasses were set down. Even the most cynical faces softened, their guarded hearts betrayed by tears welling in their eyes. And in the front row, Richard Sterling, man of steel, titan of industry, sat utterly still. At first, he resisted. He told himself it was just music, just sound, nothing more. But as the melody deepened, something broke inside him. He remembered nights long ago, before the towers and the millions, when he too had sat at a piano as a boy, playing clumsy notes while his mother smiled proudly. He remembered dreams he had buried, humanity he had traded away for power. He remembered what it felt like to be alive. A tear slid down his cheek, just as it had at the gala. Only this time, he didn't wipe it away. He let it fall. When the final chord rang out, the hall was silent. Daniel's hands lingered on the keys, trembling. He didn't dare open his eyes. For a moment, he feared he had failed, that silence meant rejection. Then came the sound. Applause. Not polite, not hesitant, but thunderous, rising to a roar. The entire hall stood, clapping, cheering, some shouting his name. Camera flashes lit the room. Strangers wept openly. The sound was overwhelming, crashing over Daniel until his chest ached. He stood slowly, bowing awkwardly, his eyes searching the crowd. And there, in the front row, he saw her, Amelie. Sterling had arranged for her to be there, though Daniel hadn't known until now. She stood on her chair, clapping wildly, her little face beaming with pride. "Papa," she shouted, her voice piercing the noise. That was amazing. Daniel's heart broke and healed all at once. He smiled at her through tears, lifting a hand in a small wave. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a janitor. He felt like a father who had given his daughter the world. After the performance, chaos erupted. Reporters clamored for interviews. Talent scouts rushed forward with offers. People crowded him, praising him, begging for his story. But Daniel only cared about one thing, reaching his daughter. He lifted her into his arms, holding her tight as she giggled, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You were right, Amelie," he whispered. "Maybe I am special, but only because of you." Richard Sterling approached quietly, watching the reunion. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low enough that only Daniel could hear, he said, "You've done something I couldn't with all my billions. You reminded me I have a heart." Daniel looked at him, surprised. Sterling met his gaze without the mask of arrogance, without the armor of wealth. "Just a man, broken and human, like any other." "I owe you more than I can say," Sterling admitted. "And if you'll let me, I want to help you. Not as your boss, not as a CEO, but as someone who owes you, and maybe as a friend." Daniel considered him for a long moment. Then he nodded, not out of need for wealth, but because he understood, music had bridged the unbridgeable. From that night on, everything changed. Daniel was no longer just a janitor. He became a symbol of hope, of resilience, of the power of hidden dreams. He played in halls he had once only imagined, his daughter always in the front row, clapping the loudest. He taught her that dignity is not in the work you do, but in the heart you carry while doing it. And as for Sterling, he too changed. He softened, he listened more, he gave more. For the first time in his empire's history, he funded programs for music, for children without means, for janitors, for cleaners, those invisible souls he once overlooked. All because one night, a man with a mop had sat at a piano and reminded him of humanity. Years later, people would still tell the story. They would say, "Do you remember the janitor who played at the summit? The one who made even the CEO cry?" And they would remember the lesson. Greatness is not about titles, wealth, or power. Sometimes, it is hidden in the quietest souls, waiting for the right moment to